Welcome to Calcast, your Create International podcast. God Network News, where we give you a new perspective
on events happening in our world today.
This is GNN.
This is God Network News, episode 204. Welcome, GNN fans, to another episode of God Network News, the podcast that tells you what God's doing around the world. Not what CNN tells you, but what GNN tells you is going on in the world. If you're tired of listening to all of that crisis network news and you want to hear what God's doing, well, give us a listen. Steve Addison is a great podcaster and very passionate about movements of peoples to Christ. And Steve has his own podcast, very successful podcast, with over 226 podcast episodes. And the name of his podcast is On the Road to No Place Left. And we highly recommend that you subscribe to his podcast because he has an overwhelming library of exciting topics related to movements. And if you want to learn more about movements, this is the place to find the information. And he has lots of training and tools and other resources that will really make your investigation of this topic successful. So we really want to thank Steve Addison and his partners there at movements.net/podcast. That's how you can find it, at movements.net/podcast, for all of the resources that he has given us for these next few podcasts. Thank you very much, Steve.
And the gospel has traveled from these original 50 villages. The farthest I have verification that there is a church in a village is 220 kilometers away. And that part of Sudan, it's a region as big as France, has churches all over. There is no major region that is left out. They're in every major city and every town, and then also obviously not in every single village, but in villages covering all the districts. Can we record this? Yes, we can, because the government has changed its stance. Initially, they wanted to suppress the movement, but they have kind of given up. Mm-hmm. They realized this is too big to suppress. We cannot. And so they have developed an attitude, I've been told by several national leaders, where they say, oh, they have become apostates. They have become Christians. Don't care about these guys. Which shows that, if this is how the government assesses this, they have seen some of the magnitude of what has been happening. All that we contributed, I asked God about this, is, and I felt he said, you were faithful and you were there. And I was so acutely aware of it by my own weakness. The week these breakthrough meetings happened, I slept in the house of one of the chiefs, village chiefs. And, you sleep basically on the ground in a courtyard because they have only huts, and the huts are too hot in the summer. And so here I was, and the wide open sky, God's, magnificent greatness displayed in the sky. And I was just plain exhausted. I was exhausted emotionally. I was exhausted physically, completely. And I didn't feel strong spiritually at all. So in utter dependence on God, saying, Father, this is you. This is so evidently you and so clearly not me. Hunger for God is one of the qualities that later my research identified as something that all effective movements have in common. So I think here you see in a state of weakness, my utter dependence of God, my hunger for God to be evident in my weakness, in spite of my weakness, and through my weakness. The second thing is boldness. Imagine, and I've thought about this 100 times. Imagine I had followed my feelings, my promptings, beautiful vaccination campaign, right? And then sat down. I mean, I believe God is sovereign. I believe there is a limitation to these reflections. But humanly speaking, could it be that all this had never happened? So there is this significant factor, I feel, in my own experience, of the human responsibility. In this particular instance, my lack of boldness motivating me to see God for more boldness. And in the moment, still the choice I had, do I choose boldness now, or do I choose to play it safe? And no one, in my mission, my leader, my supporter, no one would have blamed me, because this is hostile, right? And you're doing great work anyway, and you're sharing the good news. And yet, what would have been lost? So I say this with great awe, but the human factor, God has chosen to use us, his earthen vessels, yet, his glory in us. So that is a significant factor. A third factor is God continues his work with human brokenness, flaws, and immaturities.
You're listening to God Network News Podcast with your host, Cal Curtis. Look up our website at godnetworknews.com.
So in our case too, and I hear this from many colleagues, one of the early key leaders, he was actually the man of the first hour and the pillar of the movement, respected by everyone, training elders already himself, passing on everything he had learned. And he embellished money, he began to deceive others, and he is out now. And still God, used him for so many years, while in the background, he was already unfaithful with financial resources. How does that work? How can God be so congenial, if that's the right word, to accept it, that his servants have flaws, there is fleshly tendencies, there is brokenness, there is even sin in their lives. And yet, he used that guy, I call him Omar, he used Omar as the pillar of, almost 10 years, almost 10 years, as the key leader of the movement. How is that? Well, I don't have an answer to it other than marvel how God is so good, and also to think, at the end, God gets the credit. I think Martin Luther said, a carpenter who uses perfect tools is still a great carpenter. But imagine a carpenter who use, tools that have faults and are old and rusty, and not polished, and he still produces a masterpiece. That is a yet greater carpenter. I don't know. This is a great analogy. That's my best explanation. But God uses men and women with significant flaws, and yet he writes his story. That encourages me. In many ways, I think the locals have changed me. Sitting with them. So this is what we did. Now we are a community of, we call this Jesus groups. And in the first hour, we avoided the term church. Today, they call themselves churches. That's okay. Okay, what does it mean to share life? What do we do when we gather together? So we basically read together through the book of Acts and watched the disciples, the early disciples. Well, when they got together, what happened? What did they do? And so that's what we'll do as well. Very frankly, it was a new learning and an unlearning. What is kingdom life? Obviously, I had brought my tradition, my German way of doing, my actually conservative evangelical way of doing things, my rather traditional way. And I was open I was prepared to say the expression of the kingdom, the expression of church among Muslims or former Muslims in Sudan must look different. I was open to that. But I think I wasn't ready for the fact that it would transform me. And so, take people orientation. God made me a task-oriented person. I grew up in a culture that is known for its efficiency and, straightforwardness. Wow, these people shaped me in their people orientation. It's all about your honor. It's all about your face. And if you're the leader, I want to make sure that you're elevated, your status. Yes, we might get something done as well, but that is what really matters. And I learned that this is Jesus. Love your neighbor, love the person that God put in front of you is my greatest mission in the world. More important than to get anything accomplished. It transformed me. The value of relationships. In my Christian upbringing, relationships were a means to an end. Kind of, we need to get along so we get something accomplished as the simplified version, because ultimately we're really only doing things together for God. I learned from these young disciples from Muslim background who brought the cultural value of relational unity, the importance of the relational bond into the kingdom, and purified it and learned to resolve conflict in a better way than they used to, right? So they were transformed by the gospel too, but I was transformed because, wow, I haven't seen it. I haven't seen it, how Jesus forging the bond with the 12, for example, by spending time with them day and night, by sharing life with them, was his primary vehicle of launching his kingdom in the world.
If you enjoyed this episode, please consider donating to help us continue to bring exciting stories fresh from the field. Visit our website at godnetworknews.com and select the PayPal link on the right side of the page, or consider becoming a Patreon partner to receive access to more valuable materials exclusive to our members.